I'm Tony Bernardo, Dean of UCLA Anderson, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the UCLA Anderson Easton Technology Management Center's Tech and Society Conference. It goes without saying that today's business environment is rapidly changing and increasingly complex, shifting and creating multiple opportunities and challenges. As you might expect from the nation's #1 public university, with our mission to serve the greater good, one of the fundamentals we are focusing on here at Anderson is the role of business in society. A core question we explore with our students is, how can businesses serve multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders and customers, but employees, communities, and society at large to ensure shared value? Issues such as climate change, inequality, and changes in the future of work all demand leaders who can build organizations, products, and services that effectively serve multiple stakeholders, achieving broader aspirations and in minimizing unintended consequences. Technology is one of the biggest factors in this discussion. Technology can be a huge source of gains in areas such as healthcare, transportation, and education, offering better outcomes at lower costs. But it can also be a driver of issues such as workforce disruptions, inequality, and challenges to privacy and other rights as individuals. It is against this backdrop that our Easton Center is delivering its second annual Tech and Society Conference. The goal is to further understanding of these issues, opportunities, and importantly, the role of business and its leaders. I'm especially excited to hear from our kickoff keynote speaker, Juan Enriquez, a futurist, investor, entrepreneur, and thought leader, who I'm certain will bring new insights into the relationship between technology and ethics. I also want to take just a minute to express my gratitude to our centers at Anderson who are supporting this event. Our centers at Anderson act as a hub for leadership insights, faculty research, student and alumni engagement, and service to our communities and society. They operate in such areas as finance, real estate, entrepreneurship, technology, media and entertainment, marketing analytics, and global issues that transcend borders. I hope that throughout this Tech and Society Conference today and tomorrow, you will engage, learn, and advance your own journey as a leader. We appreciate you being here. Now, I'd like to introduce Professor Terry Kramer, Faculty Director of UCLA Anderson's Technology Management Center and the moderator for today's program.
So let me welcome all of you here. My name's Terry Kramer. I'm the Faculty Director of the Easton Technology Management Center, and I wanted to welcome you to the first day of our Tech and Society Conference. Now, to give you a little bit of backdrop here, we, as every day goes by, live more and more in an interconnected world. Interconnected across domains, interconnected across geographies, across disciplines, and most broadly, interconnected between business and society. And that was a lot of the rationale behind the foundation of this conference. Specifically, we have 3 goals in this conference. The first goal is to better understand the role of technology, and whether that be artificial intelligence, cloud computing and edge computing, high-speed mobile networks, Internet of Things, the role that technology plays in addressing areas of societal need. So healthcare, education, financial services, et cetera. The second goal of the conference is to look at the growing techlash. And what are all the areas of techlash that are most prominent today? And whether that's antitrust, whether that's data privacy concerns, whether that's future of work, digital divide, global divide, et cetera. And it's interesting, if you just look over the last few weeks, the increased number of issues that are techlash oriented are increasing. So the hearings in Washington regarding Facebook and concerns about management of their platform and misinformation and disinformation. Actions that the Chinese government is taking against its own Chinese tech companies, with notable actions breaking up companies, data privacy fines, suspended IPOs, et cetera. So understanding all of that techlash is the second goal of the conference. And then the third goal of the conference is to understand the leadership imperative. How do leaders look at all of the issues that are going on and say, what direction do I want to head on here? How do I get the best of technology and mitigate the negative aspects of technology? So I hope you'll find that this conference is helpful in all of these areas. Now, we're going to kick off the program this evening with my keynote fireside discussion with Juan Enriquez, who's the author of Right, Wrong, and How Technology Transforms Our Ethics. He's also the managing director of Excel Venture Management. And then we're going to do a virtual networking session right after this one. Then tomorrow, for our second day of the conference, and that's going to run from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., we're going to open up that discussion with a fireside chat with John Kelly. John Kelly is the father of IBM Watson, so Executive Vice President of Cognitive Solutions and Research at IBM. That's going to be moderated by Heather Caruso, who's UCLA Anderson's own Assistant Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And that session is going to get into AI for good. And then we'll have two other discussion themes after that one. One is on global technology innovation. So all the innovation going on across the world. And in many cases, we see leapfrog innovation. And then a final panel on green tech, how technology can help in areas of climate change and sustainability. So I hope you'll enjoy all of those elements again tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific. So as I mentioned, this whole opportunity of looking at technology for good against the negative externalities, all of this raises this fundamental question about ethics in the tech sector. How does technology impact ethics? And this is Juan's book and a lot of the work that he's done. Now, many of you may have thought that I reversed that reference. Many of you may have thought it really is, how does ethics affect technology? Juan's got some very interesting views about that not necessarily being the right way to look at it. A little bit about Juan's background, and it is just fascinating and aspirational. When we talk about interdisciplinary, cross-boundary, Juan's background is probably one of the best that I've seen at really manifesting that. So several elements of his background. He was the founding director of Harvard Business School's Life Sciences Project and a research affiliate at MIT's Synthetic Neurobiology Lab. He's a chairman and CEO of Biotechonomy, which is a life sciences research and investment firm. After he got his MBA at Harvard Business School, he became an angel investor, and then he founded Excel Venture Management. He's basically been a business leader, an advisor, and a speaker. He advises a variety of CEOs from a number of Fortune 50 companies. He advises a variety of heads of state, all about how to adapt to a world where the dominant language is shifting from the digital towards the language of life. He's written a whole slew of best-selling books. He wrote, As the Future Catches You, How Genomics Will Change Your Life, Work, Health, and Wealth. He wrote The United States of America, Polarization, Fracturing, and Our Future. He wrote Evolving Ourselves, Redesigning Humanity One Gene at a Time. And then the book that we'll talk about the most tonight, Right, Wrong, and How Technology Transforms Our Ethics. A really interesting read. He's a TED All-Star with 9 TED Talks on a variety of topics. Serves on a variety of for-profit boards, nonprofit boards. The nonprofit boards that he's involved with include the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, WGBH, the Boston Science Museum, Harvard Medical School, and Harvard's David Rockefeller Center. He graduated from Harvard with both a bachelor's and an MBA, both with honors. Now, in terms of the form that we're going to use tonight, I'm going to ask Juan a variety of questions to really get at some of these important issues and his views. And then we will go to Slido for a moderated Q&A. So if you've got a question you'd like to pose, go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and enter in the event code TNSJE. So for Technology and Society, Juan Enriquez, TNSJE. You can either enter your own question or you can upvote an existing one, and I'll endeavor to pose the most popular questions. So Juan, first of all, a big welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much. I don't have anything to say after that introduction.
Wonderful. Well, I looked at the number of questions I've got in my own mind, and this could have been an 8-hour session. So my biggest challenge is to get this all in less than an hour. And I want to start, because we're on Tech and Society, to start with genomics. You've been very involved in the Human Genome Project. You wrote the book As the Future Catches You: How Genomics and Other Forces Change Life, Work, Health, and Wealth. Tell us about the Human Genome Project. Tell us about the opportunities here, both for individuals, societies, et cetera.
So I wrote that book in 1995, and not everybody was familiar with the word genomics as they are today. And not everybody was as familiar with DNA back then. So it seemed like an absolutely obscure subject. But it turns out to be one of these things that people like to focus on more and more every year. And I guess the way I'd explain it, I missed the boat when I was in college, because I had a couple of classmates who were working on this, strange ability to string together ones and zeros. And what they were saying is, you can collapse every word written and spoken in English into ones and zeros. And you can collapse every image, and you can collapse every bit of music. And this is going to be really powerful. And of course, because I was focused on Mexico and politics and changing Mexico and cleaning it up and making it less violent, less corrupt, I paid no attention to science. I paid no attention to this digital stuff. And if I'd paid attention to it, those two guys were Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates. And they ended up making some difference in the world. So once I realized I missed the boat on that, then I started meeting a series of people who looked a little bit like Ballmer and Gates, except they were scientists. And the argument they were making is all life is based on 4 letters of DNA. And if you string those letters in particular orders, they will execute life code. And so let me put that in very simplistic terms. Imagine for a second that you're holding an orange in your hand, and the orange drops to the ground, and it begins to execute code, but it's not like ones and zero code. It's AATCAAG, and that means make me a little root. And then GTCA, make me a little stem. And then GCA, make me some leaves, make me some flowers, and then make me some more oranges. And so what you've got is every orange has seeds in it that are a little bit like computer programs, except that they make orange trees. And the fascinating thing about this code is, just as you can edit a sentence in English, or you can edit a bit of music, you can edit that orange and substitute AACA for TCGAG, and that will make an orange a grapefruit. Or if you put in GCA, it'll make that orange a lemon or a lime. And it's the same thing with human beings. Everybody listening to us today differs from everybody else by about 1 in 1,000 letters. So if you shift 1 in 1,000 letters, then you become somebody else. Just be very careful who that is.
So what are the opportunities you see in this? What are the implications? What are the opportunities? What will it do for individuals and society?
So I think this is a particularly important topic for a business school, because, if somebody had said the biggest company in the world is going to be a minute subcontractor of what at that point was the dominant tech company, IBM, people would have said, what are you talking about? Right? I mean, there's no way that IBM is going to be overtaken, but Microsoft stock went up by about 214,000% from when it launched. Mm-hmm. And IBM did okay, but it was in the hundreds percent, not in the hundreds of thousands percent. And so the argument that I'm making is that how we make things and where we make things is going to shift fundamentally. And between the time that you and I were in college and today, we went from almost no digital code to 98, 99% of the information in the world being digital code. Mm-hmm. And something very similar is going to happen in the future. You're going to start using life code to make almost everything else. And there's one great big difference with digital code, and that is this software makes its own hardware. So no matter how you program, one of these silly things next to your bed, you're not going to have a billion of these things in the morning. But if you program bacteria, then you'll have a billion or 10 billion of them. And let me make that anecdote a little bit more specific for our audience. If I were to ask you, what is the most published book across all history and all time, in all languages? Depending on where you are, you'd get different answers. There are some audiences that would tell you the Bible. There are some audiences that will tell you the Quran. There might be some audiences that would say 50 Shades of Grey, and they would all be wrong. The most published book across time is a book by a Harvard Medical School professor called George Church, and it's called Regenesis. And the reason why is because in the same way as you can take any word that we are saying and put it into ones and zeros, you can take the 4 letters of DNA and put them into ones and zeros. So if you say A equals 0, 0, T equals 1, 1, G equals 1, 0, and C equals 1, 1, you can tie any letter in digital code to life code. And so what George did is he wrote his book into a bacteria, and the bacteria reproduced 1 billion times, so his first edition was 1 billion copies. And you can literally hold the entire Library of Congress in about a teaspoon of DNA. And so this stuff really scales and makes stuff in a way which is very hard to understand.
And what applications do you see here? Disease eradication? What do you see as the art of the possible as an outcome here?
Well, see, as soon as you know how life code operates, you can begin to design it. So the first vaccines against COVID were designed in about 9 days. And the rest of it was testing, and the rest of it was making sure it was the right code, making sure you could scale it, making sure you could go through regulatory approvals. But the ability to write life code for vaccines, we're beginning to build that. I helped found a company that's now called Codex, which basically is a desktop laser printer, except it prints living things. It prints cells that are programmed to do stuff. And so we're not that far away from having the gene code for every known flu, bird, pig, human, whatever, and being able to plug that into a printer that will print a vaccine as an airplane is flying. So it will land with a made vaccine, or it will fax a vaccine to your house and it'll print the vaccine. And that stuff, what Venter calls biology at the speed of light, is not that far off. And that's just the first stage of this. We're another company that I helped start is now programming algae to make fuels. But there's no reason why that algae can't be programmed to make proteins or to make oils. And so what you can do is you can cut the agricultural footprint of oil producing plants or of protein producing plants by 100-fold or more. And you could give back half the Amazon and produce the same as everything that you've cut down and burned. So you can make textiles in this stuff. You can store information in this stuff. You can think of it as a second industrial revolution, except it's living machines making whatever the hell machines make today.
Yep. And I assume it goes without saying that there are risks if this is misused, misapplied, et cetera. But the gains, as you've just given a couple of examples, are massive and far outweigh the risks. Is that fair to say that in that way?
So, it used to cost, $1 billion to sequence a human genome. Now it costs about $400. These cost curves are moving faster than Moore's law.
Mhm.
It means we cannot build computers fast enough to store the information and triage it,
Mhm.
which means one of the biggest single drivers of IT scaling today is life sciences. And so as you're thinking about this stuff and thinking about the implications of this stuff, we're in this period where we are distributing the power to understand life, read life, map life, edit life, and scale life. And in strictly scientific terms, that's called sometimes a BFD. This is something that changes a lot of stuff. And so as you're thinking about that, the ethics and the distribution of this stuff, it becomes really important not to get into fights with people who have a lot less to lose than you do.
Mhm.
It becomes really important not to leave huge swaths of the world behind and angry. It becomes really important not to polarize each other and spend a couple of $1 billion convincing 51% that the other 49% are hideous creatures that you never want to associate with.
Mhm.
That is a very destructive thing to a country, to a society, and possibly to our own lifestyle.
Excellent. Excellent. Let me drill down on a related topic here about synthetic life forms. So you did a tech talk in 2019 about the age of genetic wonder, and you talked about the first synthetic life form. Tell us what that entails, and again, implications on this short-term, long-term, et cetera.
So if you take this notion that life is code seriously, then what you want to do is you want to build the first chips, the first transistors. And so one night after a great Italian meal in Virginia and a few scotches, 4 of us started really thinking seriously about, could we ever build a cell and take the entire gene code out of that cell and insert a new gene code and make that cell a different species? In other words, could you take all the code out of something and reboot it as something else?
Mm-hmm.
And, it took us about $30 million and almost a decade, but we got it done. And that was Science Discovery of the Year. That was a cover of Science and Nature and The Economist and the Wall Street Journal and yada, yada. And it's a classic case of Amaro's Law. Every new technology tends to be overestimated to begin with and underestimated in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And, when somebody built the first transistor, it was important, but didn't look that big. When somebody built the first chips, it was important, but it didn't change our lives. And now, of course, chips are everything. I mean, just try to talk to an industry that can't get a shipment of chips.
Mm-hmm.
Cars. Something very similar is happening in life, but it's happening a lot faster. So we can now build the chips, we can now program the chips, they're living, and they scale.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not quite at your neighborhood drugstore yet, but pretty much everybody who's listening is going to have their industry overturned by the ability to program life code. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that lightly, actually.
What is the implication of that? Maybe give us the best of and worst of that.
Well, I mean, the best of is, it gets very complicated because once you can print stuff like chemicals, or once you can print cells, or once you can print biotech, and I want to stress, we're not there yet. Mm-hmm. But once we get there, it changes everything. And let me put it in terms of, those of us who are getting a little bit older and have a little bit of white hair. Occasionally we worry about our bodies and our bodies falling apart. And, the solution is you go and you get a titanium knee, or you get, some sort of screws because you broke whatever. The fascinating thing about the human body is there's big chunks of the human body that are programmed to regenerate. So if you burn your skin, all right, fair enough, it hurts, but you regrow your skin. If you break a bone, at younger ages especially, it just regrows. If you, lose part of your stomach, your stomach's constantly remaking itself because of the acid.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the part that's really interesting. Each of your 10 trillion cells contains your entire gene code, with the exception of some blood cells. And what that means is the full human genome code to make every part of your body is in every cell in your body. It's in your hands, it's in your muscles, it's in your stomach, it's in your eyes, it's in your throat. And what we're learning how to do is not just to read the human genome code, we're learning how to execute the genome code. This happens when you're a child. You are born with no teeth. You grow a full set of teeth. You lose all those teeth, you give them to the tooth fairy, and then you regrow a set of teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fascinating thing about that is, so your body knows how to make a full set of teeth. It's done so twice. Why do most of us not regrow teeth unless if we become lawyers or sharks, right? Mm-hmm. And if you know how to do it twice, why can't you do it a third time? And the answer is you can. So if you go to the Harvard School of Dentistry or, schools of dentistry near you, you're going to find that there's a whole series of people working on taking your cells and regrowing your own teeth. You're going to find that there's a whole series of people working on regrowing your tracheas or regrowing parts of your heart. And we're not at the stage where the complex organs are being implanted, but we're getting damn close on tracheas, cartilage, bladders, all of those things are starting to get implanted. And so if you project that forward 10 years, what's going to start happening is just in the same way as you redo your house and you redo the windows in your house, or you redo the living room, or you put in a new fridge, you're going to start doing that with your knee. And eventually you're going to do it with your heart and with your lungs and with your stomach. And you know how to do that because you've already built 2 knees, you've already built 2 kidneys, right? So there's no reason why your body, if given the right instruction, shouldn't be able to do it again. And so this is just a really interesting time.
Yeah, what are the implications, Juan? Is this immortality kind of taking it to its full conclusion?
So it's not immortality. So the reason why I switched to synthetic neurobiology research 6 years ago out of genomics after, a few decades, is because that's where the barrier is. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to be able to remake all of our body parts in the next few decades. You want a new heart? Okay, we'll do it. You want a new liver? Fortunately, we'll do it. You can keep having reunions. The part that's the limitation is the brain. Because until you can remake the brain and implant the brain and download the memories, all these people who are telling you that human longevity is going to increase massively, no, they're not. Right? You've got a lifespan limit of 120, 130 years. Really stretch it, maybe 140, maybe 150. But until you can remake the brain in the way you can remake the other organs in your body, mm-hmm. and download the memories, there's a limit on longevity and immortality. Then you get into some really weird questions, right? And the experiments get gruesome and very strange very fast. Imagine for a second that you have Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, and you swap the heads. So you put Minnie Mouse's head on Mickey Mouse, right? And, gruesome experiment. But the questions that you could answer are really interesting questions. And they're questions that aren't dissimilar to the first heart transplants, where some of the surgeons would bring the wife or kids of the donor into the room and ask the recipient of the heart transplant, do you recognize these people? Do you feel anything for these people?
Wow.
And the reason was because for tens of thousands of years, I gave her my heart, she took my heart, he broke my heart, I lost my heart, I gave my heart. So as human beings, what we've done is we've taken this muscle and we told each other that emotion was transmitted with that muscle, that love was transmitted with that muscle. And it turned out not to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now ask the same question about these two mice. Does Minnie Mouse still recognize and love Mickey Mouse? Does that mouse still remember how to navigate a maze? Does that mouse know what it's afraid of? Does that mouse know what it likes? And if the answer is, you can take these memories from this body and put them on this body, that has absolutely massive implications, because it means that memories can be transplanted from one body to another.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of that thing, which is really complicated, is the only input-output system for those memories a body? And then things get very weird very fast, right? And there's all kinds of stuff going on right now in brain research that is just at the bleeding edge, and that's why I shifted careers, because I think that's where the most interesting stuff is these days.
Yeah. Fascinating, fascinating. Let me get to some other topics here, because each of these is kind of spawning more questions. We got a whole bunch of questions already from the audience. Let me get into the area of technology and ethics, one of your latest books. And one of the comments, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here, but one is, explain your broad view about technology and ethics and what affects what. And then you make a comment in your book about ethics are not static. They're not absolutist. They're dynamic in nature. Say a bit more on that as well.
So there's a whole lot of people who are taught, by religion or by government or by their parents or by people they most respect, that there's a right and a wrong, and it's almost like a white statue. It's pristine, it's marble, it never changes. Every time you look at it, it's the same statue. Mm-hmm. And that is a bunch of malarkey. And so we are a very adaptable species, and we kid ourselves on how often right and wrong changes. So I'll give you a couple of examples. It used to be normal, natural, legal, and expected. In fact, the survival of the society depended on sacrificing a lot of human beings, because otherwise the rain wouldn't come, otherwise the sun wouldn't shine, otherwise the society wouldn't survive. And we look at that today and we say, who were these savages? Okay, fast forward that. It wasn't that long ago before the state and the dominant religion used to torture people as long as possible and then burn them in town squares because they differed from our faith, or they questioned our faith. And, these were public acts in, the plazas of Madrid. And we look at that and we kind of go, who were these people? I mean, how dare you do that? Fast forward a little bit. Main, plazas in Paris used to hold public executions with guillotines and hold up the heads to children as part of the rule of law, as part of showing what you do to bad people, as part of what you do to bad government. And we look at that again and we say, who were these people? But of course, it was normal, natural, part of the rule of law at that stage and expected. The point of all this is a lot of stuff that was legal and expected and right, in commas, is today looked at and we kind of go, what were you thinking? Where it gets complicated is it's not just that ethics change, it's that technology is becoming a bigger and bigger change agent in ethics becoming 180 degrees different. And so if you believe ethics changes over time, if you believe that technology can change ethics, and if you believe that technology is moving at ever faster speeds, the logical conclusion of that is what we think is right and wrong is going to flip 180 degrees more and more. And let me bring a couple examples home again to people who are a little bit older on this call. Imagine a time machine that brings your grandparents back. They're 21 years old. You're having a glass of wine with them and you're talking about the birds and the bees. And of course, it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's, it's grandpa, grandma, except, they're hot 21-year-olds and they're happy to talk about it. The first thing you tell them that would really freak them out is we can now consistently have sex and not have a child. And yes, birth control existed back when they were there, except it was illegal for everybody but married people. And even then it was frowned upon. And it wasn't consistent. So the notion that you can have an act with no consequences was completely alien to them. Then comes the second part where you say, and oh, by the way, I'm going to have a year abroad. My hubby is going to stay home and we're going to conceive a child using IVF. And they're going to scratch their heads. They're going to say, IVF? So did I just understand that you're going to be on one continent, your partner is going to be on another continent, you're never going to have physical contact, and you're going to conceive a child? And so you've now separated act consequence from physical contact. And that used to be called the Immaculate Conception. And then you talk to them about, oh, by the way, I'm also going to have cancer treatments. And so therefore I'm going to freeze my eggs. I'm going to have a surrogate mother. And I can now have identical twins born 10 years apart. And so now you've separated sex and conception from time, right? And all of us on this call, we may agree with it, we may not agree with it, but it's not something that is miraculous and, against everything that I ever believed in and completely wrong for most of us. So we've adapted. Now imagine the same conversation going forward. Your 60-year-old grandchildren bring you back and begin to talk about the birds and the bees with you and what they do with gene editing and how children are born and what children look like. Do you think it's going to look anything like what it looks like today? Do you understand how much what they take for granted is going to freak us out as, what are you talking about? I would never do that. And so things change, and they change very, very quickly. And businesses often get caught in this stuff because they're teaching that this stuff doesn't change. And it does change, and it changes very fast.
Yeah.
1997, 2/3 of the United States was against gay marriage. 1997. And today it's probably not very good for your company to take that public position. Just saying.
Yep. So Juan, the implications are our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will look at us and say, you didn't do things right. Any examples you'd raise if you were to guess, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people look back on our generation, what will they criticize us on?
How long do we have? That's why, some of these debates criticizing people in the past or founding fathers or authors of Little House on the Prairie, everything else, you have to distinguish between two things. Is what they did right? No, it's not. It can't be justified. Should they be judged as harshly as we would judge anybody today doing the same thing? No, because they were taught different, right? By their parents, by their peers, by their preachers, by their doctors, by their lawyers, by their government. And if you or I had been 14 years old living in Charleston, South Carolina, and had been taught by Richard Furman, who was the leading preacher of his day, or had been taught by Jeremy Arian Sims, who was the founder of gynecology, or had been taught by Mr. Cooper, who was an Oxford Don, who came and ran the University of South Carolina and went from being an abolitionist to being an architect of secession. You know, the chances that we would have known what to do that was right, like some of the very brave people who did take a stand, that was not a 2/3 majority. That was a very, very small segment of society. And it is great arrogance to say, well, I wouldn't have done that. Maybe, right? But boy, you would have had to be the 0.01 or the 1% of that society that realized just how wrong this was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in this whole debate about how we treat each other and how we judge each other, destroying each other because of a single stupid comment, a joke, something we did, a costume we wore 20 years ago, something stupid we wrote 20 years ago or a month ago, is a really dangerous thing to do, because we're going to be caught off base. And we need to bring back in this debate some, you know, the other person, I may not agree with that person. I may think that person's fundamentally wrong, but the fundamental question is that a decent human being?
Mm-hmm.
And not, is that the other? Because right now we are really judgmental. We've forgotten two words: humility and forgiveness. We tend to stereotype people who disagree with our views on an ever-increasing bunch of topics, forgetting that if we were caught in a snowstorm in the hinterlands of whatever, and you went and you knocked on any door, that person would likely let you in, would likely offer you a warm drink, would likely try and fix your car, and would likely try and get you back on the road or call a mechanic or something, out of a sheer basic human decency.
Mm-hmm.
That person wouldn't open the snowstorm door and say, are you a this? Are you a that? Tell me what you believe about X. They would try and help you, right? And we forget that humanity in each other. In these battles, we spend $2 billion every cycle convincing one half that the other half are, you know, baby killers or fascists or this or that. What we have to understand about this stuff is the world is really good at ripping nations apart.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 times more flags, borders, and anthems in Europe today than there were a century ago. And there's still questions as to whether Scotland stays, Corsica, and southern Finland, northern Italy, the Basques, the Catalans, it goes on and on. Do we really want to rip great nations to pieces?
Yep.
And you know, boy, some of the stuff I wrote this book, The Untitled States of America, in 1998, and said, look, folks, be really careful. The subtitle was Polarization, Fracturing in Our Future. And it wasn't meant to be a how-to, it was meant to be a warning.
Yeah. And Juan, on this topic of technology driving ethics and the bad behavior, et cetera, when you look at companies like Facebook, and God, they've been in the news so much. I just interviewed Roger McNamee last week, et cetera. Is Facebook, and obviously they've done a lot of great stuff, but the worst of Facebook, whatever you believe that is that a living example of your point that it's created this giant echo chamber that has accelerated divisiveness and judgmental views and a whole bunch of other bad stuff?
Yeah, there's no question it has done stuff that's really awful. It has also allowed groups that could never talk to each other to come together. And not just groups that are, it comes back to that basic notion of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of people who may believe stuff that's different from what you and I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What's really dangerous about this debate is when you stereotype 49% of the population as the other, you begin to do things that ethically are absolutely indefensible. So everybody on this call knows the horrible instances of Japanese internment in World War II, right? It's just drummed into us.
Mhm.
And, they took Japanese families, Japanese American families, and they put them in concentration camps. And, how dare they have done that? Okay, fair enough. What the hell is wrong with us that we allowed over the past few years for families that came across without papers, they didn't pick the right parents, to not only be placed in prisons with an indefinite term, but to deliberately separate the children and lose them, right? And somehow as a society, we thought, hey, well, yeah, that's going on. But when you criticize the past and when you criticize what was happening in the past, I hope most of you did something when they started taking children and losing them from their parents. Because that's the kind of stuff that the Brazilian junta did. That's the stuff that the Argentine generals did. That's the stuff that Pinochet did. And they would deliberately take the children of people they disagreed with or who they considered radicals and lose the children and put them up for adoption with military families, and the parents would never find them again if they survived.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something I ever expected to see in the United States.
Yeah.
Ever. I thought those lessons were learned. And somehow when we make the person the other, you get back to Voltaire, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
Yeah.
And by not isolating the 0.5% or the 0.1% that is truly evil, by putting those people together with 50%, we forget the basic humanity in one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you rip apart nations.
Let me ask you one. We got a whole bunch of questions. I want to make sure we get to them. Let me ask you one other question on this topic, and then we'll go to the audience questions. You've made a fairly compelling argument that technology and the rate of change has affected our ethics.
Yep.
Let me ask you the opposite direction for a second about where ethics has either had a good effect or bad effect on technology. And I'm thinking of the somewhat active debate going on between Mark Zuckerberg and Mark Benioff. Mark Benioff, founder, CEO of Salesforce, who will regularly say, if you're not guiding your organization by a North Star, you're going to do horrible stuff. And he talks about his North Star and how that drives a lot of the actions of Salesforce, and said, listen, Facebook does not have a North Star. Growing at all costs is not doing that. Is there not an example that is the Mark Benioff example that said, listen, if you had quote unquote ethics, if you thought about things in a thoughtful way and weren't pointing out the other and doing all these other, that you would then drive technology-based products, services, and companies in better directions? Do you buy that, or that's kind of the exception to the rule, not the rule?
What you and I were taught in business school is so completely different from what a CEO has to do today. So if you look at the Edelman, global barometer, it's not just a US phenomenon. All of a sudden, business is seen as the only big institution that is both ethical and effective. Mm-hmm. NGOs are seen as more ethical than business, but less effective. Mm-hmm. And government is seen as not very ethical and not very effective. Mm-hmm. And the consequence of that is, again, in this poll, and it's a global poll, that 68% of people think that CEOs are responsible for pushing societal change. Mm-hmm. And a similar number think that the CEO should act before government forces anybody to act, because CEOs are responsible for societal change. Mm-hmm. And so when you think of, what we were taught, the Milton Friedman stuff and shareholder, and that's who you're responsible to, right? You are now a substitute government because government's so ineffective. You are now supposed to be the leader in terms of achieving ethnic equality, ethnic opportunity, access to wealth and power for people who haven't had it. There's a whole bunch of societal engineering, which is now dropped into a CEO's lap. And so the chances for a CEO to make the wrong comment, to do the wrong policy, to ally with the wrong people, to give a donation to people that somebody else is going to get very upset about, those things have become astronomically important. And you can make and unmake a brand in an afternoon through a tweet, through something you say, because this whole humility and forgiveness, that just ain't it. Everybody wants to punish. They're not in a forgiving mood right now. This is a very angry, polarized society. And the consequence of that in a society that is highly armed and weaponized is really dangerous, right? This is not a trend that we want to push. So I love the idea of celebrating people like the founder of Patagonia, people like the founder of Chobani. I think we're seeing more and more examples of people who are doing well and doing good. And there's some very hard questions for economists and capitalists out there. And I, of course, as venture capitalist, I'm in this, right? I'm not excusing myself. I'm not saying this in the abstract, but when you and I were taught economics, it was the allocation of scarce resources. And now all of a sudden we're in a situation where we've got an abundance, in fact, extra, you name it, antibiotics, aspirin, textiles, computer, whatever. I mean, put the supply chain stuff aside right now. We have enough for everybody in the world at a basic level. And then you get into really complicated questions like, should a few dozen people concentrate 49% of the wealth on the planet? Is that okay? How about 60%? How about 80%? At what stage do we begin to, and there's more and more people who haven't been as lucky as you and I, who are really angry about the system. And reacting to the system in a very nasty way. And I think we ignore that anger at our peril. Because I think the ethics on who has what and how much are going to shift, and I think they're going to shift very radically.
Fascinating. Okay. Let me ask a few questions. We've got a whole bunch of questions here. I'm going to start out, Martin, and quite a few other people had upvoted this. Are you concerned about genetic modification in humans? It could increase inequality. The wealthy could modify their children to be superhumans. How does that movie play out, and how concerned are you on that?
Yes and no. So let me unpack that. Thinking of that example of grandparents thinking about sex, there was a really stupid incident by a Chinese doctor who modified the genome of 2 babies to avoid getting AIDS. And he did it without the right overview. He did it without the right supervision. He did it without the controls in place to make the thing safe, without enough informed consent. Make a long story short, ostracized, laboratory destroyed, scientist ends up in jail. Big scandal. That same story in 20 or 30 or 50 years may end up very different. You may have a conversation with your kids or grandkids where they say, why were you so backward that you didn't bother to edit out the genes that gave me cancer? Why did you leave me with a KRAS gene? Why did you leave me with a P53? Why did you leave me with a BRCA? Why were you so primitive? Because as the price of gene editing gets faster, better, cheaper, and safer, what seems to us a yuck, which I agree with, we shouldn't be editing babies, especially at this stage, may end up being something that is normal, natural, and expected for 2 generations. The second point, which I think was really interesting, is if you're going to modify longevity in a serious way, and if you're ever going to live on Mars or anywhere else, you really have to think about engineering in things like radiation resistance. Right? It just doesn't work without, a Deinococcus radiodurans type gene that allows these things to do the backstroke of nuclear reactors. And the amount of, sheer radiation that you're exposed to in space means that your DNA replicating mechanisms haven't adapted to that. And that's going to require some really serious engineering if we're ever going to leave this planet. Now, you can agree or disagree as to whether we should. That's a different debate.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent, good. Another question. This is from Jorge, and again, several others. Thinking about legal implications of printing biotech cells and rewriting a genomic code. Who regulates this? How does this work on a global basis?
I spent most of the morning debating that with a lot of people who were a lot smarter than I am. There's a National Academy study right now thinking about how you regulate emerging technologies in medicine. And that is a front and center question, and we've been working on that for 2 years. I think rule number one, you're transparent. When we did that first synthetic genome, we asked every major religion in and told them what we were going to do and asked them to study it for a year. We took every security agency and brought them in and said, look, this is coming. We brought in a whole bunch of business leaders and said, this is coming. So people knew for 4 or 5 years before that was sprung on them that this was coming. And the consequence of practicing open science is that the Science Discovery of the Year was basically the Vatican and a bunch of other religions and the security agencies and the White House came out within 72 hours of the announcement and said, we're okay with this. And that's because we spent 5 years telling people what controls you want in place. How do you want us to do it? What do you want us to do? What don't you want us to do? How far do we go? And that kind of societal debate is going to be incredibly important in building trust, in building security, in getting technologies adopted. The arrogance of, I'm going to do this because I can do it and I'm not going to tell you. Bad idea. Not the way to do science.
Excellent. Let me ask one last question, and then I want to do a wrap up, and then we can get to our the breakouts. On the social networks right now and everything we're living through with Facebook, et cetera, how do you envision free societies managing and mitigating the toxic effects of social media? What should the government do or society do?
I'm going to say something which I found to be very unexpected when I researched untied states. And I said 98, that's wrong, it was 88. One of the most interesting countries in the world is Canada. And that's not a phrase you often hear unless if you're talking about hockey or a couple of other things. And the reason why Canada is so interesting is because it came so close to splitting. Right? It was just so close to being French and British. Mm-hmm. And the Maritimes almost became part of the United States or an independent country in 1949. And that vote was really close. And what you've seen Canada do time and again is to take some very deep-seated divisions that are historical divisions and be able somehow to restitch the country back together in a very humanitarian way. And what you're seeing them do right now, which is brilliant, is when Hong Kong first announced it was going to leave the British sphere, the Canadian consul in Hong Kong basically went out and gave out passports with no requirement of residency to the smartest and most entrepreneurial people he could find in Hong Kong. And that's the reason why Vancouver today has the highest degree of patents in universities in Canada. That's the reason why it's one of the most vibrant real estate markets. That's the reason why when you come out of the airport in Vancouver, you see just this strip of stuff as you go over that first bridge that looks like Hong Kong. I mean, the degree of entrepreneurship in that migration. Mm-hmm. Okay, now fast forward that to the last few years in the United States. while the United States was adopting a immigrants are rapists and murderers posture, Canada basically went out and just sucked a lot of the brains that used to go to Google, that used to go to Facebook, that used to go into the national laboratories, that won 50% of the US Nobel Prizes, and said, come here. And you watch what happens in Canada over the next 10 years, because they have a community that is very good at adopting immigrants, adopting different cultures, doing so very quietly, doing so in a non-confrontational way. Doesn't mean you don't have big problems in Canada. Mm-hmm. But it means that's a country that when you look to how do you restitch a society, really interesting country.
Fascinating. Juan, let me do this. I always like at the end of every session to share a few of my own takeaways so you can upgrade them or share any final comments you've got. First of all, I got to start out and just say, I always kind of think about the people that speak and, I interview them and what defines them. Your ability to think laterally and expansively is just very impressive, because I look at the range of things that we covered and the rationale. So several things that to me came out of this. The discussion on genomics and writing life code that can drive biology at the speed of light, and what this opportunity can create if harnessed well. The second point, and it's a broader one about technology. Technology is overestimated in the short term, underestimated in the long term. And it's a little bit of a beware message. We tend to look at early failures, early challenges, and then kind of poo-poo it, and we don't see the long-term trajectory of the technology. A third area here about synthetic life forms, redoing the body, that can create not immortality, but certainly much longer life and much better health outcomes. Fourth area, ethics are not static. And a lot of what you talk about is make sure we look at context and what's going on uniquely with an individual, a community, a society that might have driven decisions, as opposed to looking at things in the abstract that may get a more static look at ethics. Your view about technology changing ethics, which is kind of counter to how a lot of people refer to it. Technology is becoming a bigger and bigger change agent in our lives, and thus in our ethics. And then a bunch of kind of personal warnings about how we look at one another. Avoid stereotyping, avoid judging. Don't make the other person the bad person. It's very easy to kind of go down that trail. And actually your Canadian example was one of, good outcomes you get if you don't behave about the other guy. The idea about business people and are they becoming a substitute government? And interestingly, a bit of a warning that may not be a sustainable model, and get government and our system working better, and don't completely punt on business people. And then the final thought is, again, it gets back to this kind of, I always think about people's mental map, how they think about things, and you've transcended so many boundaries and borders. But your message about think about the problem you're trying to solve. How big is that problem, and how great is it before you get to all the negative things of what needs to be stopped? Think about knock-on effects. So what can that lead to? Think about the context broadly you're operating in, and then form your views, as opposed to starting with all these truisms and self-held beliefs about things and letting all that kind of guide how we look at the world. Those are the things I took away. Your upgrades on that, or other thoughts, parting thoughts?
Better than I've ever said it. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Juan, just a massive thank you. I said, you're lateral in your thinking and you're expansive, and that couldn't be a better set of learnings and style for us to start the conference with. Let me thank you. We're going to go to Zoom breakouts, and Juan and I are going to roam around each of the Zoom breakouts. You're going to see the link to the Zoom breakouts in the chat feature. So just look at that and click on that to get to the breakouts. And then again, tomorrow we're going to have hybrid format, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., both in person and remote for tomorrow's session. Thank you all, and we'll be seeing you in the virtual sessions. Juan, thank you. Huge thank you.
Thank you.